I was arrested last week, 27th of March, and when I was in the back of that van, they took my phone off me and everything. I could hear them in the front joking about how they like to stop and search random black people. Actually here in Piccadilly Gardens, they said that their sergeant, basically their manager, was going around with Section 60, which is basically the section of the law which allows them to stop and search people without any reason. As long as they have a hunch that someone might have something on them, they can stop and search them. And they use this indiscriminately, well actually no, discriminately against black and brown people. But we know that institutional racism does not only exist towards people of colour, but to people with foreign sounding names. I myself.
And also tattoos.
Oh, and tattoos as well, yeah. I mean, all kinds of expression. Trans people, women even, like as long as you don't look basically like a middle-class white male, which for the most part I do, you're fucked, right? This country does not serve people who are not in the ideal mold of what they think people should look like. And that's got to change, and the police are not going to help us with that. What we need is collectivized action to actually oppose this bill and oppose other forms of regulation which do not support people. The reason why they're trying to push this bill through is because they know that us protesting will make a difference. They know that collectivized action can challenge the government. They know that when people stand together, they can't do anything to stop us. If we all today just rejected the powers of Westminster, what the fuck are they going to do? Nothing. Because there's more of us than there are of them. They cannot stop us. That's why we need to oppose this bill, but this is not the end of the fight, this is the start of the fight. The reason why they don't want us to speak is because they plan to do unspeakable things. They plan to increase regulation on people and decrease regulation for corporations. They plan to basically introduce a police state which is racist, which is sexist, which is transphobic. They plan to introduce basically an authoritarian state, and we need to oppose that now. This freedom of speech movement that we've got going here is fantastic. Right now there's not that many people here, but yesterday there was a huge crowd, day before a huge crowd, I'm sure there'll be another one next week. This movement is all over the country, and it really does matter, because if we can defeat this bill, that will show that protest counts for something. That will show that protest can be used to make change, and from that we can go on to make bigger and better changes, not just defending the right to speak, which is ridiculous that that's under threat anyway. We can defend the rights of black and brown people, we can defend the rights of Asians, we can defend the rights of Romani people and travellers and transgender people and anyone who is currently fucked over by this system. We need change, and we cannot wait for another vote. We can't wait 4 years to decide between basically Tony Blair or David Cameron again. That is not an option. 4 years is too long to wait, and we know that protests can make change now, so let's do it. Thank you. Bill. The main headline is that it effectively outlaws the right to protest, or I'll specify, it gives the police the right to shut down with force any protest they deem with their discretion to be causing annoyance. We could get 10 years in prison for standing here and talking to you through a PA in the middle park. And if you think about it, most of the rights that we enjoy as citizens were fought for through protest. Not just the right of half the country, roughly, women to vote, but the right of all working class people to vote had to be won through protest. So we literally wouldn't have a right to exist democratically in this society or matter in this society if we didn't have a history of protest movements. And that is why the government wants to shut down the bill, because Extinction Rebellion, although I have some problems with some of the stuff they do, Extinction Rebellion managed to completely change the narrative on climate change.
completely changed the narrative. And now Tories are talking about it, Bill Gates is talking about it, and they understand that mobilizing that number of people to cause that amount of disruption is dangerous. And so, when Black Lives Matter protesters took to the streets in 2020, they were met with police brutality. And that's why the police have put this bill through, because they've fucked all over throughout the pandemic. They know so many people are suffering from inequality, from food poverty, from so many of the plights of neoliberal capitalism put under the strain of a coronavirus pandemic. And they know that people want to rebel, and they know that people want more than the furlough money they've given, and they know that people want more than giving no money for self-isolation. And so they are putting through a bill to restrict protests so that they can continue with their fascist agenda without our opposition. There may have been some lies in the media about us. People here may have heard that Kill the Bill protesters broke policemen and police officers' bones in Bristol, ruptured a lung or some shit. It's not true. They lied. There were no police casualties. When there is violence at a protest, it is every time started by the police against the protesters, so that they can go to the media and say, oh, Black Lives Matter protesters are a load of, violent anarchists who want to destroy Britain. And we're not violent, they are the violent ones. But they have so much power already, such a good image in the eyes of the public, that they can lie to the media and people will believe them. But the facade is coming down, and after the murder of Sarah Everard, it took a white middle-class woman being raped and murdered by the police for people to care. But people, journalists from tabloid press included, are starting to take notice of increasingly brutal tactics used by police. In fact, most of the statistics looking at force used against black and brown people by police shows that the number of arrests and forceful tactics used are increasing year by year. So, what happens next with a neo-Nazi already part of the police? And there could be more, and the police powers being expanded almost exponentially, so that they can stop and search you at any time, so they can set up what is essentially prisons for children, so that they can violently remove travellers and Gypsy Roma people from their communities and their homes, and even the reforms to things like violent criminals or sexual offenders looks at putting them in prison for even longer. And we know that the prison system in the UK is inherently flawed, as people come back out and commit crime again because they are re-socialized and trapped in a cruel and rigid prison system that does not reform or allow people to change their ways and unlearn the actions and the behaviors that they have learned in order to land them in a prison. It just punishes them and perpetuates the cycle of harm and abuse. And that's what the bill will ultimately do. Not just shutting down our voice, but perpetuating all the violence and harm that we've seen kind of bubble to the surface over the past 10 years since the Tories came to power in 2010. In fact, since Margaret Thatcher decided to deregulate everything, it just so happened to work so conveniently that it would lead to a really great time in the economy for the Tories to implement austerity 30 years later. And now, 10 years after that, 10 years after stripping our public services and normalising so much weird shit in politics, just openly lying on the news, in Parliament. Boris Johnson literally lies every time he speaks. Somehow the Tories, well, not just the Tories, because Labour are part of this too, have managed to change the narrative, to desensitise and gaslight the entire population. And we now accept lies, and we now accept unaccountability, and we now accept corruption and billions being given to Tory donors, because we're just desensitised to it. And the bill will just desensitise us to police violence. Police that Kill the Bill protesters going undercover as postal workers to knock on their doors. That is really disturbing. dystopian, that is really Nazi, we should just be really terrified for this. And that's why anyone here who gives a shit, or who feels like we as a collective people have something to gain through the right to protest, please pull up next Saturday. I think it'll probably be 1 p.m. St. Peter's Square again. That's the sort of time it happens. But you can tweet from home, email MPs, all that shit. Kill the fucking bill.
I'm not sure how long I'm going to be speaking for because the police have just turned up, so we'll see what happens. Thank you to everybody who's organised this today. It's been a long weekend of protest. We've shown that there's so many of us who stand against this bill, and it's so important right now, including anybody that just happens to be passing by, that we come together and send a really clear message. This bill threatens our right to protest, for our voices to be heard, and the ultimate casualty will be democracy. There's not one person in this country or in this place right now, including the police officers that have just turned up, that haven't benefited in some way from the protests of the past. Many of the rights we enjoy today were fought for and achieved through protest, whether it's on the grounds of class, race, gender, sexuality, religion, age or job. We all owe something to our right to protest. It's a fundamental part of democracy. Another area this affects is our ability to hold the institution to account. Our schools are being run as businesses, young people are being disenfranchised from higher education, and the NHS is being privatised left, right and centre, including to American contracts. Our public property, like spaces we're stood in today, is being sold out from underneath us. Private interests and corruption have just this year funneled billions of public money to private contracts who fundamentally failed to deliver, resulting in the deaths of almost 150,000 people from COVID. This bill arrives as lockdown eases, and the government know we're about to hold them accountable. They have blood on their hands and they know it. Too long has this useless leadership failed us. If this bill passes, that's only going to get worse. So here we are today, we have a right to be heard and we will not be silenced. One of the things the bill affects is our right to make noise, so if anybody here and anybody that's joined the protest today would join me in making as much noise as possible, I'd really appreciate it. To everyone that came and all the nice people here in Piccadilly Gardens who have listened to us. I literally cannot reiterate how important it is that we managed to block this bill going through Parliament. Otherwise it is 10 years for protesting, for organising protests, for being noisy at protests. If you don't want us to become like the Nazis, please kill the bill.